Hi, welcome to our masterclass. This is Sexual Desire Differences, Understanding and Navigating a Mismatch in the Sheets from Sex Chat for Christian Wives. I'm here today with Bonnie, and Chris is not with us on this masterclass. She had quite a few family health emergencies that have happened this summer and beyond, and so she's just been away for a little bit. But we have got you covered with a really good class.
Yes, we are going to move from here. We're going to shift into a section where we talk about what entices sexual engagement. And then we have a second session where Jay and I talk about unraveling the mismatch, some things to think about. And then Jay closes us with another session called Closing the Gap. So, really, this masterclass is a combination of three different sessions. And we hope that you will glean a lot of great information. And also, I just want to make known that we are not licensed therapists. This information is from peer reviewed journals and from life experience and our own education.
Yes, and of course, always with the principles of Christianity and God's will covering all of this. And so, without further ado, I think we should go get started with the first session with you, Bonnie.
Hi, I'm Bonnie. And for my portion of this sexual desire difference masterclass, I'm going to present some ways to understand the mismatch because there is more to being in the mood than just physical arousal. From my personal story, our mismatch didn't show up in our marriage until real life started to happen. We had jobs, lots of stress, and then add children, and things shifted. So you can be equally matched for a time, and then a new season arrives and things are different. So, understanding why this shift happens can help you build common ground to see this mismatch as an opportunity, not a battle. So bear with me as I share my screen for a PowerPoint presentation. All right. So if there is a feeling that one of you is winning and the other one is losing after you've had sex, you're not going to get very far in resolving this problem. So I invite you to sit back and listen with open hearts and open minds so that by the end of this masterclass, you'll have a better idea of how to build a partnership and build a mutually satisfying sex life. Because the desire to be sexual isn't just black or white. The switch that toggles sexual desire isn't always off or on. The interest in being sexual lies on a spectrum. So the black end of this spectrum represents zero desire, and the white end of the spectrum represents 100% desire to be sexual. And there are a myriad of levels in between. And where you land on the spectrum depends on you. Depends on your physical health and well-being, your source, your season of life, your overall stress level, or even what the day has held for you. And chances are your spouse doesn't lie on the same end of the spectrum as you. That plus adding in the messiness of life, and you've complicated and compounded the difference in your sexual desires. Then, layered within all of this are preconceived notions of what turns people towards sex. Movies, television, social media, and pornography have built this idea that passion shows up white hot and orgasm seamlessly and simultaneously follows. And as we've said often on the podcast, this is not reality in a long term marriage. So, what we're seeing on media is not factual or accurate. The natural state of your sexual interest and wrong beliefs about how sex should work all add to the mismatch. Now, sexual desire is not just a physical experience, even though that's what we've been taught for decades through this Masters and Johnson's 1966 study. This linear model that goes step by step represents the results of a laboratory study on human sexual response. And it depicts sexual experience as always proceeding in a step by step fashion. There's arousal, it always is followed by plateau, which is always followed by orgasm, which is always followed by resolution. And what's even more troubling to me, it, other than this very dogmatic, legalistic way of looking at sexual response, is that this study did not recreate the environment of a long term marriage. Basically, the method of study was having sex in a lab with the scientists watching. Some study participants were married, others were strangers and they were paired together, and even others watched pornography. And each of these are outside of Christian values. And again, they don't mimic the type of sexual engagement committed people who are married have. So, although sexual response, getting turned on physically, can proceed in this step by step fashion, typically the desire to engage in sexuality is more complicated. The beginning of balancing mismatch is understanding physical arousal is only one component of a sexual relationship. Fortunately, the search for understanding sexual desire in a marriage with longevity has continued. Studies in the last few years have shown that sexual desire for women and men are impacted by many things like stress, health, and feelings of partnership. So let's talk through this newer concept. Its basic premise started with Rosemary Basson in the year 2000. She saw that the desire to be sexual for women was more a relational cycle than solely a linear physical experience. Since then, others have tweaked the model, and the cycle now shows positive experience reinforcing each station to culminate in making love. Even more recently, studies have found that men desire more positive relational experience in their sexual life as well. And the whole cycle starts here, down in the lower left-hand corner with the yellow background. And it starts with non-sexual rewards. These are positive things that have nothing to do with sex. Things like, how strong is your friendship? How healthy and whole do you feel as an individual? And how supported do you feel by your spouse? And how satisfied are you in the way you both resolve conflict? For couples with mismatched desire, this can be a powerful insight. The partner with lower or more responsive desire isn't broken or withholding. They may simply need more non sexual connection as a runway to arousal. So if you do these things in the lower left corner here, if you do these things well enough, not perfectly, but well enough, you can move on to the next stop on the cycle. Non-sexual reasons for initiating or engaging sexually. And I know that kind of sounds confusing. Non-sexual reasons for having sex, but it basically means desiring to be sexual and it having nothing to do with physical arousal. In my own journey, I realized that even though I might not be physically aroused, lovemaking did soften our hearts towards each other. It promoted a sense of partnership, bonding, and connection. I wasn't faking it or giving in. I was making what Gottman calls a relational bid, a way of nurturing emotional connection, security, and intimacy. Non-sexual reasons for engaging also include non-sexual physical affection, like holding hands, cuddling, hugging, a gentle touch. But all of these things are done without an agenda. They are to create emotional safety and signal closeness without pressure, because pressure and demands kill sex drive. When a partner engages in touch without expecting sex in return, it builds trust and creates positive associations with physical closeness. This communicates, I want you not just sex from you. So, for couples navigating a desire discrepancy, this kind of non sexual, undemanding affection bridges the gap between emotional intimacy and physical intimacy. It helps the lower desire partner feel emotionally connected without the stress of performance, while also giving the higher desire partner meaningful ways to express love and closeness, often making sexual connection more likely to emerge naturally rather than forced or avoided. Let's say lots of healthy, non sexual reasons for engaging are present. We've now reached the part of the cycle I like to call sexual interest, because enough positive things are happening for the individual and the couple that the thought of being sexual is enticing, even if there isn't a lot of physical action yet. So, this willingness to become receptive, as it is called, is also responsive desire because you're responding positively to a bid for lovemaking. And for me, I like sexual interest because there was a shift in my mindset, and it was due to the positive things that were happening in our relationship. But this shift meant that when he initiated or tried to initiate, it wasn't a negative in my brain. It was a, yeah, I can do that. I'm interested in that. So that's why I like to call it sexual interest. There are also other things to consider in order to be receptive, that you're well rested, stress free, the situation is appropriate, you have privacy to begin, and the relationship is connected, and you both wish to express love physically. There's no pressure or demands. And then from here, the thought of being sexual awakens. The person turns their mind and body towards sexually engaging and focusing on sexual touch because of the positive motivation that's leading up to this point. And then the desire to be sexual fully comes alive as you start foreplay and your body starts to respond. And it culminates in physical desire. And this physical, not just physical desire, but physical arousal, your body gets involved, and that desire to continue lovemaking towards the ultimate moment is there. And this is also where the 4-step 1966 model shows up, because of the physical nature of the part of the because of where you are physically on this cycle. It makes sense that now you will experience arousal, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. And the designers of this cycle say that the physical arousal leads to satisfaction with or without orgasm. And this cycle also takes into account that occasionally spontaneous desire just happens. You have a desire to be sexual with your spouse, and it just appears. The study does show that it usually happens after a long separation or with a new partner, but that's not necessarily the only place it'll show up. So, as I move towards wrapping up, I just want you all to remember that desire looks different for different people. Whether you are a willing, responsive desire person or you're a spontaneous desire person, both desires are normal, and neither one is right or wrong. They just are. So, if you would like to move towards partnership and building this bridge to gap the mismatch, I want to offer some conversation starters. So, to plug in to the cycle and to start thinking about positive relational stuff, a question here will help you shift the goal from performance to connection. And instead of asking how often, sit down and discuss what helps us feel connected enough for sexual desire to grow. And invite curiosity instead of criticism. Let's explore what you each need instead of assuming that one way is right. Explore the differences with curiosity. And then share this new language of sexual interest. Explore what grows sexual interest for each of you. And then what does sexual intimacy mean to each of you? That's very important. Having shared meaning goes a long way to building all that relational connection that's needed. So, before my final wrap up, before I finally say goodbye, I do want to make mention of the spectrum once again, because you'll remember that the black end represented the absence of desire and the white end represented having desire all the time. And if you live or sit on either of these ends, it can be very distressing. So it makes sense that either of these situations in a marriage can result in a mismatch. And if not handled well, it will result in a great deal of conflict or even a breach of trust. And Jay and I will be exploring that in our next session. So to close, a season of mismatched sexual desire doesn't need to be a season of frustration. It's a scavenger hunt. It starts with a search for personal health and well being and lots of positive relational connection and support. And it can end in both of you desiring to express your love in a physical way.
Okay, so I'm here with Bonnie, and she just covered the spectrum of sexual desire, how it's more than a mismatch. And now we're going to get into unraveling that mismatch. What's really going on behind that gap?
Yes. So I'm going to start a PowerPoint presentation here. So, unraveling the mismatch. A mismatch isn't a problem until it's a problem. So, differences in sexual desire are normal and natural and neutral until those differences start creating pain, distance, or resentment between partners. And it only becomes a problem when shame, resentment, or avoidance start replacing curiosity and compassion. So, in other words, the mismatch itself isn't the issue, it's the meaning each partner attaches to it.
Yeah, we want to talk about areas that can create that mismatch. And among those, we identified four things that we want to go through today, which is health, relationship, your individual experiences and perspectives, and of course, sin.
Hmm. Yes. And before we get into health, relationship, the individual experiences, perspectives, and sin, we want to begin and end with prayer. So if you're praying for your spouse less and complaining about your spouse more, this can create even a bigger mismatch because every time you complain about your spouse, your heart hardens towards them a little bit. So every time you pray for your spouse, your heart softens towards them a little bit. And no one fixes a marriage problem with a hard heart. And while there's no magic prayer to fix your mismatched sex drives, it is powerful to pray over scripture. It is tempting to pray, change them, Lord, but the most transformational prayers start with humility and realizing that ultimately the only person you can change is yourself. A healthy marriage is made up of two healthy individuals. So do what you can to grow into emotional maturity and the character of Christ through prayer.
Amen.
Any thoughts around that, Jay?
No, I just agree completely.
Okay, great. Well, I think you're going to discuss evaluating your health.
Yes, I think the next slide though was going to say, aha, begin and end with prayer.
Oops, sorry.
That's
Sorry,
okay.
guys.
Y'all got it. Okay, so let's get into evaluating your health. So, what do we mean by evaluating your health? Well, there are several factors that could be affecting your health. So, among those factors are stress, sleep disturbances, pain, unbalanced hormones, chronic illness. Oh, I have pain twice. Why did I do that? Mental health, etc. Maybe because pain is a particularly important thing we need to deal with.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
pain.
But the point is that when I started actually researching what was going on with lower desire husbands for my higher desire wife book, I found that health was a big aspect, and there were all these different things that affect our capacity for sexual interest and engagement. And so I often tell people that the first place they should start if they have a what they consider to be a problematically low desire is start with your health. So go see a healthcare provider. Let's talk about that next. So when you go see your healthcare provider, you want to make sure you're getting regular screenings. Definitely ask for a physical exam and get the customized care that you should have. You have your own individual health, and you need to be coordinating with a healthcare provider for that. And those regular screenings are going to be very important. And that includes things like checking your hormonal levels, your thyroid, making sure you're getting screened for depression, all those kinds of things that need to be part of your health um, care. So
Mhm.
the other thing we really need to focus on is well being. Well being is so important. We are going to be much more interested in sexual intimacy if we feel good about our bodies, if our bodies have the capacity to engage. And so you should be pursuing your physical well being. And that means making sure you hydrate. In fact, I'm sitting here, as always, with my glass of water. Um, Eat healthy. That doesn't mean you have to eat perfect. Almost nobody eats perfect, but eat healthy most of the time. And then you can be fine having that piece of cake or whatever, or sneaking some of your kids' candy from time to time. Um, Prioritize sleep. I wanted to say get enough sleep, but I know that's not possible for everybody. But prioritize sleep when you can, and then move. I know that Bonnie has talked a lot about exercise, but for those of you who are like me who hear exercise or work out and you just cringe just a little bit, the thing about it is it's just move more, whatever that looks like. And that could be taking a dance class. It could be walking the neighborhood. It could be going to jazzercise. It could be whatever. Or it could be making sure that instead of getting the best parking space in the grocery store, you park far away and you walk. But these things are good for your well-being, and they will be good for for how you feel about everything. So make sure you evaluate your health and make sure your body is able to engage as it should. And if you're not where you should be, address those concerns.
Mhm. I think what came up for me when you were talking about pain is vaginismus. I know more and
Yes.
more younger wives are experiencing vaginismus, and we have a recent episode with a pelvic floor specialist that would be great for them to listen to if you think you're experiencing vaginismus.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you to observe your relationship when it comes to the mismatch. So we've just considered the health of your body, and now let's consider the health of your bond. The ability to be vulnerable affects emotional and physical intimacy. And these three things, meaning, safety and trust, and freedom, help create vulnerability, which in turn can grow into sexual connection. So, what is the meaning each of you, whoopsie doo, sorry. What is the meaning each of you connect with sex? For one partner, sex may equal connection, reassurance, or validation. And for the other, it's an overflow of the positive things that have happened outside of the bedroom. And when the meanings differ, desire can too. So, both of you understanding what sex represents to the other will help you keep from missing each other emotionally, even if you do everything right physically. So, things to ask each other and yourself is, what does sex mean to me? What do you hope to feel through it? Do you hope to feel loved, desired, safe, powerful, close? But in the end, to help connect this mismatch, perhaps you could create a shared statement where you both agree upon what is the meaning of sex in our marriage. The next thing to think about is the level of safety and trust in your marriage. Desire can't thrive where safety is missing. And I'm not talking about physical safety, I'm talking about relational safety, which is being secure that you will not be punished emotionally for sharing vulnerable feelings, thoughts, or opinions. And this applies to both of you, the higher or the lower desire spouse. And relational safety comes through consistently being kind and caring and having humble actions towards each other over time. And that consistent action over time builds trust. And trust is imperative to be wholly present and completely vulnerable in the bedroom. So, things to ask each other and yourself is, do we feel emotionally safe enough to be open, vulnerable, and fully ourselves? Because if not, rebuilding safety, not scheduling more sex, may be the real starting point. And then lastly, I want to talk about freedom. Healthy relationships allow each of you to voice your needs without fear of condemnation or punishment. So, healthy desire requires freedom to say yes or no without that fear of any pushback or punishment. Desire struggles often reflect deeper dynamics over control, autonomy, and mutual respect. If one partner feels pressured or obligated or responsible for the other's feelings, their body can often resist, not out of punishment, it's just a protection. And conversely, if one feels perpetually rejected or deprived, resentment can block authenticity and build defensiveness. So neither fear, duty, nor defensiveness can nurture genuine passion. True admiration and space that is free of judgment keeps a relationship thriving and stokes that sexual interest and desire. So, things to ask are, is our sexual connection rooted in mutual choice? Do I allow my partner the space to speak in a vulnerable manner, or do I always shut them down? So, when each person's yes is fully voluntary, desire begins to rebuild because freedom really is the soil of intimacy. And now I think I hand it over to you, Jay.
Yeah, how do you have those conversations? That's an important question that I often get. So when you're experiencing this gap, a lot of times you're experiencing some frustration on both sides of this. And so you want to have good conversations, but sometimes we end up with tension and friction, and then we don't feel that freedom and we don't feel that safety. So we need to think about how to have those conversations in a positive way about this mismatch. So you really need to take this attitude of seeking to understand. There's this great, the seven principles for highly effective people. One of those is seek first to understand and then to be understood. But all too often, we start these conversations really, really wanting our spouse to know exactly where we are and what we want and all those things. Those are important things. But we want to cultivate the situation where we're slowing down and we're listening beneath the surface to see what's going on with our spouse. And that encourages them to do the same for us as well. And so, how do we have those conversations? Well, we need to do a lot more asking questions than just making statements. So, ask those questions. What does sex mean to you? Do you feel free? How does it feel for you when I say no? Things like that. Listen intently, like really try to listen. And this is the hardest thing because we often listen with what we're thinking through what our response is going to be as we're listening. But we really want to listen and hear what they're saying and try to sympathize with what they're saying. You may not understand where they're coming from, but they came to it from their experiences. And so we want to make sure we're showing some sympathy and saying, okay, I can see where you get that, or I understand this feeling. And then affirm them. Even if you can't necessarily affirm what they're saying, maybe what they're saying is problematic, you can affirm them for telling you what they're telling you. Say, well, you know what? I really appreciate you sharing with me. I'm still struggling to understand it, but I really want to affirm that you told me this, and now we can start to talk about it. So affirm them so that you continue to have the conversation and also encourage them. Encourage them to explore their own views in sexuality. Encourage them to follow through with things that they know they need to do. Encourage them maybe even to check on, yeah, maybe your husband needs to check on his health. Whatever encouragement he needs, you can be there for that. But as y'all also talk about this, if you can come up with some action items, and we talk about this all the time on our podcast about having baby steps. So one conversation's not going to get it, but you can in a conversation say, you know what? Here's the next step we take. And it could be an actual action item, or it could be we want to continue this conversation later. But whatever that is, make sure you follow through. And if your spouse asks you to do something reasonable, follow through on that as well. And that will create an environment where you can start to have conversations and you can begin to manage and navigate this mismatch.
Yeah. Great, great strategies towards having those conversations. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
And the next topic we're going to discuss is recognizing sin and sexual brokenness. So I want to shift our attention to these things because we're shifting now from seeking to understand each other to seeking to understand ourselves. Because as I talk, I want you to only think about yourself right now. So, sexual brokenness is any place in our lives where our views of sex and sexuality do not align with God's design and purpose of sexual intimacy. Or there are places in our sexual experience that are compartmentalized, and Jesus is not allowed in that space. While not always, sexual brokenness is oftentimes a sinful breaking of relationship with Yahweh and with your spouse. Now, if you remember back to my first conversation about the spectrum of desire, and on that spectrum there were two ends. One end was 100% sexual desire all the time, and the other end was zero sexual desire. Well, having those being at either of those ends, um, oftentimes, if you live at any of either of those ends, these responses are a consequence of a traumatic experience in your life. Not always, but often. And you did not cause that traumatic experience, and you were highly impacted by it. And Jay and I, we sit with you in that pain because it was devastating. And there is hope to resolve the pain, dysfunction through Jesus's healing. And I highly recommend that you listen to one of our recent podcasts where we talked about helping your husband heal from traumatic childhood wounds. But whether your trauma has shut you down sexually or keeps you in a hyper aroused state due to sexual immorality, we have a personal obligation to God, to ourselves, to our family and spouse to seek healing and wholeness. Oftentimes, the trauma leads us to think that we are unworthy of love and attention. And if you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. But that is a lie from the enemy. When living in this unworthiness, sometimes people turn to sexual immorality to escape from the feelings of shame and unworthiness. Porn viewing, reliving sexual fantasies in your head, reading erotic material, viewing racy social media accounts, or acting out sexually with anyone other than your spouse, whether you cross the flesh barrier or not, can create this high desire or the lowest desire. And all these things are sexual immorality, and they create a huge mismatch of desire, even if you think you're keeping everything a secret. Because your spouse most likely can feel this unfaithfulness in the subconscious, and their Holy Spirit within them clues them into these things, and they may not have words for them. Additionally, people with compulsive sexual acting out often have an emotional intimacy disorder, meaning that their behavior deficits are because they're stuck at an emotional level that corresponds with their sexual trauma. So oftentimes it's not just the secret sexual life that's a problem, it's how you're relating to your spouse with blame, shame, defensiveness, angry outbursts, and those kinds of things. And all these things do go against God's design of marriage. So if you're viewing porn and doing all the things I mentioned before, it's time to really self-assess and try to peek over that wall if there's a big wall of denial and get help. Because at the base of that, it's the lies of the enemy that are telling you you're unlovable, unwanted, and unworthy. God says you are none of those things. He sings over you with delight. So part of recognizing your sin and getting help is also knowing your identity in Christ. Now, there's an opposite end of this. As I said, sexual brokenness is not seeing sex the way God sees it for intimacy. And if you're not doing any of what I mentioned above, but you're still not experiencing a healthy balance of emotional desire and physical motivation to be with your spouse, it is also up to you. It's also a personal responsibility to figure out what's going on. While sex is not the meaning of life or the meaning of marriage, if you're physically capable and do not have extreme health problems, and you have a spouse that desires to be sexual with you, we have an obligation to care about ourselves and to find an answer for our own empowerment. This isn't a duty or a response to their pressure. It's about holistic health and seeing our sexual experience as God sees it. So, sexual sin is a poison that will destroy your relationship with God, yourself, your marriage, and your family. And sexual brokenness keeps us from seeing the beauty of a healthy sexual relationship like God designed it to be. So, whether you're in the midst of either of those things, both are a personal responsibility to heal from. You can be your spouse's cheerleader, but it is up to you to do your work and to let them do their work. So,
Yeah.
any thoughts, Jay?
Actually, as you're talking about that, I'm thinking sometimes about some of the higher desire wives, and I mentioned this before, is that sometimes what's happening in that situation is that there's too much emphasis put on sex filling the emotional holes. And so that is a form of sexual brokenness as well. And that does not mean that the desire to close this gap, to have more sex, to have better sex is a problem. That's not the problem. But when you put all your eggs in one basket, and
Mm-hmm.
as we've talked about, as you talked about with the relationship, that there are multiple kinds of intimacy that you should have in your marriage. And while sexual intimacy is important, I mean, that, or we wouldn't be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Emotional intimacy is also important, spiritual intimacy, recreational intimacy, whatever. And so it's important to kind of do a self check and ask yourself, is there sexual brokenness going on inside me that needs to be addressed?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And if you need more resources for either of those things, if there is sexual sin and sexual immorality, you can reach out to me at Bonnie at Strong Wives. And if you're a higher desire wife that is struggling, please reach out to Jay. And what is your email address, Jay, for them to contact you?
Well, the best thing to do is go to my Higher Desire Wives community, and you
Mm,
can find that at my website, hotholyhumorous.com,
very good.
or pick up my book.
That's right. Uh, so as we move on and we wrap up, we want you to know there's always hope. Romans 15:13 is one of my favorite verses for healing and wholeness. And I just want to bless you with it. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Would you like to add any closing thoughts, Jay?
No, that's it.
Well, thank you for being through this section of our presentation, and you'll hear more from Jay very soon.
So I've got a lot to share. I'm going to get straight to my slideshow here so y'all can see my points. All right. So my part is on how can you close the sexual desire gap? And I really want to give practical tips for your marriage. But the first main tip I really want to say is you need to be able to talk about it. So we know that couples who discuss their intimacy have more satisfying sex lives. This makes sense. You know, intuitively, you think if you can talk about problems, if you can express what you like, what you don't like, what you need or want, then you can most likely work through some of those things and end up with a more satisfying experience. But when I say talk about it, I'm not saying talk just about the gap, but talk about the things that can impact your interest. So, for instance, your sexual story. And what do I mean by your sexual story? I mean, what brought you to where you are now sexually? Like, what messages did you hear about sex growing up? How was sex treated in your family? What prior sexual experiences did you have that were embarrassing, painful, or traumatic? Or perhaps they created expectations that haven't been realized. But based on what you've been through, what does sex mean to you now? And it's important to be able to tell our sexual story and to listen to his sexual story. And that can help illuminate how we've ended up where we are now. You also want to talk about what you wish for. So, when it comes to the gap in particular, you want to talk about frequency. What frequency do you actually want in your marriage? And I've had several counselors tell me that they have the experience of a couple coming in saying, we are very far apart on how often we want to have sex. And the lower desire spouse will say, you know, he or she wants sex all the time. And then the higher desire spouse will say, well, if it was left up to them, then we would only have sex once a month. And it turns out neither of those is true. When the counselor says, okay, let's put a number on what you would actually like, you might find out that the higher desire spouse is okay with 3 times a week, and the lower desire wants once a week. And suddenly we're like, wait, this isn't that big a gap. And be honest with yourself about your frequency too, because sometimes we can overstate it. If you are the higher desire spouse and you can feel like you're not getting enough, and then you overstate how much you really want. And likewise on the other side for the lower desire, just but talk about what would be a frequency that you wish you had in your marriage. Also, discuss your repertoire because that can really impact our interests. Like, what's going on in the bedroom? Is what you're doing working for you? Is it working for your spouse? It's important to talk about what your sexual intimacy is going to look like, what it will include, what it won't include. And then talk about the before and after. What really kind of helps you get there? Like what is the before stuff that you would like to see happen? And what about after? So I've heard from a number of people who say how frustrating it is that their spouse finishes sex and then just leaves and they don't get any afterglow. And then that makes them more reluctant to have sex the next time. So talk about what you like happening before and after. Also, you want to talk about your turn-ons and turn-offs. So, specifically on this, back in the 1990s, doctors Eric Jansen and John Bancroft introduced the dual control model of sexual arousal. So, they noted that our willingness to engage in sex at any given time is a balance between our sexual excitation and our sexual inhibition. But a lot of people want to think about that in a simpler terms as brakes and accelerators. So let's talk about what that looks like. Going with the brakes and accelerators and all that kind of idea, I would say let's think about it as greens and reds. So nobody is up for sex all the time or never wants to have sex. Well, actually, some people are. And if that is the issue, then it is not an issue of turn ons and turn offs. There is some sort of sexual dysfunction going on that needs to be addressed with the individual. But most of us, you know, we're kind of in this midpoint. And then something will either turn us on or turn us off of having sex. And typically, you would say that the higher desire spouse is going to be more likely for this or this traffic light to go to green. And the lower desire spouse, it's more likely to go to red. Maybe they have more turn offs than turn ons. But we all have them. So there are things that will put the brakes on, and we will say, no, no, that's not good. Now, it could be something that your spouse does that you need to discuss. It could be some things going on in your own life. For instance, having a very busy day or being exhausted. That's going to be a break for you. Being interrupted by the kids, might just put the brakes on right away. So you want to talk about what are those things that put the brakes on for you. But then also, what are the things that take you to the green light? What are the things that make you want to put on your accelerator? And we have these too. So we want to figure out what these things are. And so obviously we want to, as best we can, limit the reds and increase the greens. But also it can be a matter of timing. you might say, well, at this time of day, I'm going to have a lot of reds, or there are things, these things are, reds for me. So if you see this as happening in our lives, that's not a good time to initiate. But anyway, just talk about what are those turn offs and the turn ons and how you can better get to the greens. Okay. When I say all this stuff about talking about things, one of the responses I often get is, what if you won't talk? Yeah, I know. There are some husbands who have shut down when you've tried to bring up the topic of sex. And I would say, first of all, give it time. You may just need a little bit more time. He may need a little more time to prep, and he may come back around. May not have been ready for the conversation then. And also, when you introduce the subject, give him time to answer. Let the awkward silence hang for a little bit and see if he'll come around and start talking. Also, try again later. It might help for him to have a heads up and you say, hey, I really want to talk about sex and wouldn't be a good time, or just bring it up at a different time and see if he's amenable this time. You can also just make positive changes for yourself. So if he won't talk, you can still make improvements on your own and do things that help you improve your own sense of sexuality. And your positive changes that you make for yourself and for your marriage may have an impact on him, and it may make him more willing to talk in the future. Of course, you are also able to set boundaries. So if your husband has just shut down all conversation and there are things going on that really need to be dealt with, for instance, he's pursuing things in the bedroom you don't want, and he won't talk about it, it's okay to set boundaries and say, you know what? I need us to talk about this. I can't continue to engage with you sexually if we can't discuss this issue. So it is okay to set some boundaries in certain situations. All right. The next thing after talking about it is to be intentional. Both higher and lower desire spouses should be intentional in pursuing satisfying intimacy. And most of the time when we talk about this, intentionality in closing this gap, it falls first to the lower desire spouse. At least I've heard this in a lot of marriage resources. They're like, okay, well, there's a gap. So what we need to do is help the lower desire spouse increase their sexual interest, and then they can have lots more sex and all will be great. That's not our position here. So our position is something that you are together, hopefully closing this gap. And with that in mind, I actually want to start with the higher. What can we higher desire wives do to, you know, uh, to help our husbands get more interested and to deal with this gap? So the first thing I would say is consider your approach. All too often, we can come across as pressuring, and maybe we don't even tend to, but it can come across that way. And we need to consider approach and ask, is this working for my husband? Is there something I could be doing differently? Is there some way I could soften this? So think about that, consider your approach, and figure out what works for your own marriage. Also, you want to value other intimacy. So when you say, if, as part of your approach, I hope you're also not saying, I just want sex, but communicating that you're really wanting to be intimate with your spouse. But they're not going to believe that. Your husband's not going to believe that if you don't value other intimacy in the marriage. And you should value other intimacy in the marriage, regardless of what's happening with your sexuality. So pursue other forms of intimacy, emotional, mental, um, spiritual, recreational, whatever other intimacy you can have with your spouse. Another thing that was a game changer in my own marriage is to move from initiation to availability. And what I mean by that is, well, I just sometimes would, instead of asking my husband directly for sex, I would say something like, hey, just wanted you to know if you're interested in sex, I'm up for it tonight. And then I would go about my business. And I didn't really have some particular expectation of yes or no. And so I didn't get like super disappointed if it didn't happen. But because it was just sort of an invitation, it actually turned out that my husband was saying yes more to that than the direct approach. And so it really worked well for us. I'm not saying there's a guarantee with this, but it might be a helpful perspective to take for some of y'all. All right, next is to be clear with initiation. Yeah, there is that invitation, but like I said, I literally said sex. So you also want to be clear because sometimes it can be unclear what you're asking for. And you might end up with a situation where you have mixed signals and sex could have happened, but your spouse didn't read what you really wanted. So, go ahead and be clear with initiation. But at the same time, take rejection for what it is. So your husband can say no, you know? And when that happens, it's very rarely a rejection of you. Look, I know it feels that way at times because you're reaching out wanting to be close and he's saying no to that. And we need to understand, though, that the rejection in that moment is really a rejection of sex at a particular moment in time. And there are numerous reasons why someone might not want sex at a particular moment in time. And so take that rejection for what it is. Don't overblow it. Try to put it in perspective. And then, of course, you can always ask for rain checks. So if now is not a good time, when's a better time? Hey, would you be up for it another time? What time would work better for you? What would you like to do? So ask for rain checks and see if you can, put something on the calendar for another time. All right, on to what the, ooh, oh, finally celebrate successes. I forgot about that one, but that is important to just kind of celebrate those successes and reinforce when things go well. All right, lower desire spouses. You want to affirm that sex is good for you too. Now, this can involve some real self-talk if that's been a struggle for you to continue to say, yes, God's made sex for me. It is good for me too. It is good for our marriage. And affirm that to yourself. And if you're struggling with that, we have podcast episodes on that. I think we actually have a podcast episode titled Sex is Good for You Too. So go look that up and we'll help you kind of affirm that. But I think it's important that you remind yourself that sex is a really good thing for yourself. Figure out what's in the way. So, what's going on that's in the way, and how can you clear those obstacles? What keeps you from wanting sex? And some of those things you can probably troubleshoot easily on your own. But if you've got some big things going on, if what's in the way is some relational difficulty, past trauma, or something like that, you really do want to address that. That's certainly going to impact your interest, understandably, and you want to deal with that. Also, ask for what you need and want. So be willing to speak up and say, these are the things that really help me get in the mood. So if you can look back, you can see those last two, figure out what's in the way and ask for what you need, want, are really back to the brakes and the accelerators. But go ahead and express those things to your husband. If you do say no, when you say no, try to use not now and explain what's going on. That will really help your higher desire husband. Is if you can say, I just not now's not a good time, and I'm very tired, or the kids have been, you know, really rambunctious today, or I had a rough work day, or whatever, to give an explanation can also help your higher desire spouse understand that it's not a rejection fully of them, but that, you're just not up for it right now. That's fine. But when you feel it, go for it. Truly go for it, because that can also help. It will improve your sexual confidence, and it will also kind of make your higher desire spouse remind them that, yes, desire is something you have, and you can come together in those moments. Then there are, of course, things that you could both be doing. Nurture the relationship. Bonnie has talked about this a lot, how important it is to have a friendship outside the bedroom. For me, that goes a little bit beyond friendship. For me, what really helps is also have flirtation and or romance, those kinds of things. But whatever you think about your relationship with your husband, you want to make sure that you're nurturing that outside of the bedroom, and you will have greater sexual interest inside the bedroom. Clear those obstacles together. Remember, we talked about figuring out what's in the way? Work together to clear those obstacles and figure out how you can remove the brakes so you can get to the accelerators, including creating an inviting bedroom. So it's important for you both to feel comfortable in your bedroom. So talk about what that involves and how you could create a more inviting bedroom. Schedule sex. This is actually a really, really big one because when you schedule sex, that can close the gap somewhat because now the lower desire spouse knows it's going to happen. They can take time to mentally, physically, emotionally prepare. And then the higher desire spouse can kind of relax knowing that there is a time on the calendar it's going to happen. They're not on edge thinking, is it going to be today? Is it today? Is it today? They can just relax and know, well, if something happens in between now and then, great. But I know that this is going to happen on this day. Use non-pressure signals. So this can really help to do things like maybe you put a candle on either side of the bed and one of you lights a candle when you're interested and the other one can light the candle when they're interested. And if they're both burning, we know we're good to go. So just ideas of how you could do that. You could use coded language, other, you know, physical things, pillows flipped this way or that way, but find some non-pressure signals and that can help you. And then finally, pray about your sexual intimacy. If you can, pray together, because if you pray together about this, then you're also going to feel some motivation to kind of come together and figure out a frequency that works for both of you. All right, so we've said to talk about it, to be intentional, and finally, make sure you celebrate your growth. Closing this desire gap is a journey with ups and downs, learning and adjusting, and progress, not perfection. So when we talk about closing the gap, we're also saying it's not like you're just going to close the gap. You're likely going to narrow the gap, but it's going to probably do this, over the years because it's something you're going to need to continue to work on. And the goal is not to have the exact same desire, but to rather to navigate your desire differences in such a way that both of you feel seen, valued, and loved, and that your marriage includes regular sexual intimacy that you both enjoy. We really hope that the information we've given you through this course has been helpful. We hope that you can put it to practice right away and see some improvements in how things are going in your marriage, especially your sexual intimacy. But if you want to pursue some more, we have some great resources, including our past webinars. We have 6 of them. They're really value priced, and they include Understanding Your Sex Drive, and then one for the husbands called Understanding Her Sex Drive. So that way we kind of explain to him some of the stuff that we have talked about. And then Foreplay, Getting in the Mood, Oral Sex, and Orgasm. And I want to turn it over now to Bonnie because she has some great resources for y'all.
Thanks, Jay. Yes, if you are a couple in recovery from problematic sexual behavior and the impact of that on the wife, I offer coaching at strongwives.com for wives and for couples. I also offer a sexual clarity class that's offered just a couple times a year. It's typically been just for the wives, but in January or early February, we are opening a group for husbands as well. And so you can find both of those resources on my website, strongwives.com. And I also want to encourage you to check out the hundreds of podcast episodes that we have over at Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. And
That's
Jay,
a
what do
great
you
tip.
have to offer?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I actually have some things on this particular topic as well. So, if you're a higher desire wife, I have really done a lot of speaking to and about you, and I have a higher desire wife community. You can find that through my website, hotholyhumorous.com. And then I also have several books out, including my most recent one, The Higher Desire Wife, that can help those wives whose gap includes where she wants sex more often than he does. And I really go very deep into this, cover a lot of information for y'all, and really help you come to a better place in that. I also would like to say that if you're struggling to have some of these conversations or just want some guidance in how to do that, I have a book called Pillow Talk 40 conversations about sex for married couples that can help you have really productive conversations. It's not just conversation starters, but a whole guide that can help you have quality conversations, including about this mismatch that some of y'all are experiencing.
That's great. Well, why don't I close in prayer, Jay? Would that be
That would be
okay
great.
with
Thank
you?
you.
Okay,
Yes.
sure. And so, listeners, please join us in this prayer. So, dear Heavenly Father, we just come to you in humility and to worship and adore you for this gift you have given us. And I pray, Lord, over the couples that have been watching this webinar, that if there is a place of conflict within this gift of sexual intimacy, Lord, that you help reveal to them the places in their own lives where where they can where they can grow and where they can
Mm.
hear each other, Lord, because we know that confusion is not of you, but clarity is, and connection is also from you, Lord. So I pray that any hard heartedness can be softened into that heart of flesh and just a turning and leaning in towards each other so that we can resemble Christ in the church in our marriage, Lord. Thank you again for this opportunity, and thank you for technology, and just a blessing upon anyone that's listening to us right now, that you would bless their marriage with happiness and holiness. And I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.